The silk of the wedding gown was a living thing, whispering against Imani's skin with every frantic step she took. It was a heavy, opulent whisper, a sound that belonged in a grand hall filled with hushed witnesses, not in this silent, polished corridor where the only other sound was the frantic patter of her own heart and the clumsy, desperate rattle of the suitcase wheels against the dark wood floors. Each clatter was a betrayal, a shout in the stillness of the sprawling estate. Freedom was supposed to be quiet. She was a breathtaking contradiction. A bride, swathed in pearlescent white, her full curves embraced by the gown's exquisite cut, her dark skin a stark, beautiful contrast to the fabric. But her hair was escaping its elegant arrangement, her face was slick with the sweat of fear, and she was dragging her life behind her in a battered, oversized suitcase. She'd packed in a blur of panic, grabbing whatever her hands could find in the luxurious prison of her suite. A life reduced to a few sweaters, a worn paperback, and a pair of sensible shoes she prayed she'd get the chance to wear. The deal had been her father's. A debt of money and honor, sealed with a handshake she'd never witnessed, but whose terms were now written all over her life. She was the final payment. Imani Tanaka. The name felt like a costume, ill-fitting and strange. She hadn't said the vows yet, not the final ones. In her mind, that made all the difference. As long as the ceremony wasn't complete, she wasn't truly bound. She was just a woman in a very expensive dress, running for her life. Ahead, a shoji screen door promised a side exit, a path to the gardens she'd seen from her window. If she could just make it to the outer wall, she could disappear into the labyrinthine streets of Tokyo. She shoved the heavy suitcase forward, using it as a battering ram, and slid the paper door open. Freedom was not on the other side.
He was.
Kaito Tanaka stood there, framed by the doorway, a silhouette against the soft light of the garden beyond. He wasn't dressed in the formal kimono she'd expected. He wore a suit of charcoal gray so dark it was nearly black, tailored with such surgical precision it looked more like a second skin than clothing. It made him seem taller, broader, a solid wall of quiet menace. The only color on him was the intricate, violent blue and crimson of the tattoos that crept past his starched white collar and the cuffs of his shirt. Dragons and waves, frozen in ink on his skin. He wasn't looking at her face. His gaze was fixed on the suitcase. It was a slow, deliberate inspection, as if the luggage itself had personally offended him. Then his eyes lifted. They were dark, unreadable, and utterly still. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look angry. He looked inevitable, as if he had known she would be here, at this exact door, at this exact moment. As if her desperate, frantic escape was nothing more than a scheduled event on his calendar. Imani, he said. Her name was a low sound in the quiet hall, soft and yet carrying the weight of steel. It was the first time he had spoken it directly to her all day. She froze, her hand still clutching the handle of the suitcase, the ornate silk of her gown pooling around her feet. The air thickened, growing heavy and cold. He took a single step into the corridor, and the paper screen slid shut behind him, snuffing out the beckoning light of the garden. The latch clicked into place with a sound like a final judgment. He was between her and the exit. He was the exit. The ceremony is not finished, he stated. It was not an accusation. It was a simple observation, like noting the time. Imani found her voice, though it came out as a ragged whisper. I can't do this. He took another step closer. He moved with a predatory grace that was utterly silent. The expensive wool of his suit did not rustle. His leather shoes made no sound on the polished floor. He moved like the room owed him space, and the air parted for him. The scent of him reached her then. Sandalwood and something else, something like cold smoke or distant rain. Your father made an agreement, Kaito said, his voice still impossibly calm. He stopped just a few feet from her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. A debt of honor. It is a very serious thing in my world. This isn't my world. She shot back, a spark of her old fire cutting through the fear. A flicker of something amusement? Curiosity. passed through his dark eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. You are wearing my name. You are standing in my house. You are breathing my air. Your world is whatever I say it is. He reached out, his movements economical and precise. She flinched, expecting a blow, a rough hand on her arm. But he didn't touch her. His long, elegant fingers closed over the handle of the suitcase, his hand brushing hers. The contact was brief, a spark of warmth against her cold skin, but it sent a tremor through her entire body. It was an intimate, terrifying touch. A claim. He lifted the suitcase, as if it weighed nothing. This will be returned to your room. He turned, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he was going to walk away, to leave her there. But he paused, looking at her over his shoulder. We will finish the ceremony. And you will not run again. Because if you do, your father's debt will be recalculated. And I will collect it from his body, not his daughter. Do you understand? The threat was delivered in the same placid tone he might use to order tea. There was no rage, no emotion at all. Just the cold, hard certainty of a promise he would absolutely keep. The floor dropped out from beneath her. He had chained her to him not with steel, but with the life of the very man who had sold her. Imani stared at the rigid line of his back, the sheer, unassailable power in his posture. She could fight him. She could scream. But she could not escape the truth of his words. Her gamble had failed. The cage had just grown infinitely smaller. Without waiting for her answer, he began to walk back the way she had come, toward the grand hall where their wedding awaited its conclusion. He didn't look back to see if she was following. He didn't need to. He knew she would. With the rustle of a silken shroud, Imani turned and followed the man who now owned her future, each step taking her further away from the woman she used to be. The rest of the ceremony was a blur of ritual and suffocating silence. Imani stood beside Kaito, a statue in white silk, her hands cold and numb. She spoke the required words, her voice a hollow echo in the cavernous room. The few witnesses, hard-faced men in dark suits, their bodies etched with the same ink that marked their leader, watched with impassive eyes. They were not guests, they were guards. When it was over, she was no longer Imani, the quiet university archivist who loved the smell of old paper and the weight of history in her hands. She was Imani Tanaka, wife of the Oyabun of the Tanakagumi, a man whose history was written in blood and fear. Their new home was not the traditional estate, but a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of a skyscraper in Shinjuku. It was a palace of glass and steel, with panoramic views of a city that glittered like a web of captured stars. It was beautiful, sterile, and silent. The silence was the most unnerving part. It was a weighted, watchful quiet, the kind that precedes a storm. For days, they coexisted in that vast, empty space like ghosts. Kaito was a creature of routine and shadow. He would be gone before she woke, returning late at night, the faint scent of smoke and the city's chill clinging to his suit. He never touched her. He rarely spoke to her. He simply occupied the space, his presence a constant, low-grade hum of danger. She was given everything she could possibly want: a wardrobe of designer clothes, meals prepared by a private chef, any book or film she desired. She had everything except freedom. She was a priceless artifact, placed on display in a glass case, and the glass was bulletproof. One afternoon, driven by a desperate need to feel something other than suffocating dread, she explored the penthouse. She found his study. The door was unlocked. It was a mistake, she knew, but she couldn't stop herself. The room was minimalist, dominated by a massive black desk and a wall of windows. On a low table, tucked away in a corner, was a small, simple shrine. It held a single photograph in a plain silver frame. It was a woman. She was Japanese, with a gentle, smiling face and kind eyes. She looked soft, happy. Everything Kaito was not. That was Akari. Imani spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. An older woman stood in the doorway, her face a mask of polite disapproval. She was the head housekeeper, a stern, silent woman named Mrs. Abe. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude, Imani stammered. Mrs. Abe's gaze softened for a fraction of a second. She was his first wife. She stepped into the room, her movements precise. She was killed. 5 years ago. A meeting that was supposed to be a truce. The Ito clan. The name meant nothing to Imani, but the story landed like a stone in her stomach. What happened? They used her to get to him, Mrs. Abe said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, which only made the words more chilling. They knew she was his only weakness. The master was delayed. He did not get there in time. That was the moment everything changed. Imani looked from the smiling woman in the photograph to the cold, empty desk where Kaido conducted his empire of violence. It wasn't just a business arrangement. This marriage, this cage of glass and steel, wasn't just about her father's debt. It was about his failure. He hadn't brought her here to be a wife. He had brought her here to be a ghost he could succeed in protecting this time. She was his penance. The knowledge settled deep inside her, a cold, heavy thing. It didn't make her feel safer. It made her feel like a placeholder, a stand-in for a tragedy he was trying to rewrite. A few days later, the first crack appeared in his perfect control. Kaido had insisted she join him for a walk in the penthouse's private rooftop garden, a stunning oasis of green suspended 50 stories above the city. The air was cool, the scent of pine and damp earth a welcome respite from the sterile atmosphere inside. They walked in their usual silence, separated by a careful foot of space. Suddenly, a sharp bang echoed from the street far below, a car backfiring. It was a common city sound, harmless. But in this world of constant threat, it sounded like a gunshot. Imani reacted without thinking, a lifetime of ordinary safety erased in a few short weeks. She flinched violently, a choked gasp escaping her lips as she dropped into a crouch. Kaido's reaction was faster than sight. In an instant, the space between them was gone. His body was a shield, covering hers, one hand pressing her head down while the other splayed protectively across her back. He was a wall of solid muscle and expensive fabric, moving with the lethal grace she'd come to recognize. She was pressed against his chest, her face buried in the cool wool of his suit jacket. She could feel the hard, steady beat of his heart against her cheek, smell the intimate scent of sandalwood and smoke that was uniquely his. It was nothing, he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear, his breath warm on her skin. You're safe. The danger passed as quickly as it came. But he didn't move away immediately. For a long, breathless moment, he held her there, his hand a firm, warm weight on her back. It was not a gesture of affection. It was pure, predatory instinct. Protection. Possession. But it was also the first time he had touched her with anything resembling care. The first time he had offered comfort, however unintentional. When he finally pulled back, his face was a mask again. But she had felt it, the tremor in his hands, the momentary lapse in his iron control. She had seen the man behind the monster. That night, she found her chance. A service door, usually locked and alarmed, was propped open by a careless maintenance worker. A path out, a direct line to a service elevator, to the street, to a life she barely remembered. Freedom was a quiet, unassuming metal door. She stood before it for a full 10 minutes, her body trembling. She could run, disappear, take her chances in the city. But an image flashed in her mind, the photograph of the smiling woman, Akari. And then another, the raw, unguarded instinct in Kaido's eyes as he shielded her in the garden. He was a monster, yes. A killer, a man who had bought her life. But he was also a man haunted by a failure he was desperately trying not to repeat. Running wouldn't just be her escape. It would be his second failure. And she had a chilling certainty that the consequences of that would ripple far beyond just her father. It would ignite a war. With a deep, shuddering breath, Imani reached out and pulled the heavy door shut. The click of the lock echoed the one he had made in the corridor, but this time, it felt different. It was not the sound of a cage being sealed. It was the sound of a choice being made. She turned her back on the exit and walked deeper into the heart of the monster's gilded prison. The peace, such as it was, did not last. The Ito clan, the architects of Kaido's past tragedy, had not forgotten him. His new marriage was, to them, an insult and an opportunity. A message arrived, not with a threat scrawled in blood, but with a quiet, chilling sophistication. It was a beautifully wrapped gift box delivered by a reputable courier. Inside was a first edition of a book of poetry Imani had mentioned once, a favorite from her university studies. It was a thoughtful, almost intimate gift. Except one page had been carefully torn out, and tucked within the book was a single, perfect white camellia, a flower that, in Japanese culture, could symbolize a noble death. The message was clear: we see her. We know what she loves. We can touch her whenever we want. Kaido said nothing when she showed it to him, but the air in the penthouse dropped 20 degrees. His stillness became absolute, the silence in the apartment taking on a razor's edge. The number of guards doubled. Her gilded cage became a fortress. She was no longer allowed in the rooftop garden. The city views from the windows began to feel less like a vista and more like a taunt. The Ito clan's next move was more direct. Kaido had business at a high-end art gallery in Ginza, a negotiation over territory disguised as a cultural evening. It was considered neutral ground, a secure location. He insisted she accompany him, a display of unity and strength. Imani, dressed in a stunning sapphire gown that made her feel like royalty, moved through the event on his arm. She played her part, a serene, beautiful accessory to his power. That is when she made the mistake of looking up. Across the crowded room, she saw a man staring at her. He was not admiring her. He was cataloging her, his eyes cold and assessing. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to two other men near the exit. It was a signal. Her blood ran cold. She tightened her grip on Kaido's arm, her nails digging into the sleeve of his jacket. "We have to leave," she whispered, her voice tight with panic.
"Now."
Kaido's eyes followed her gaze. He saw the men, and his entire demeanor shifted. The mask of civility dissolved, replaced by the lethal predator she knew lurked beneath. "Stay behind me," was all he said. What followed was not a chaotic firefight, but a piece of brutal choreography. Kaido's men materialized from the crowd, forming a moving wall around them. The two men by the door moved to intercept, but it was too late. As they were swept toward a private exit, the third man broke through the cordon. He was fast, lunging for her. Imani cried out as his hand snagged the silk of her sleeve. For a terrifying second, he had her. Then Kaido was there. He didn't draw a weapon. He moved inside the man's reach, a blur of motion. There was a sharp, sickening crack of bone, and the man crumpled to the ground, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. In that split second before his guards hustled them out the door, Imani saw Kaido's face. It was not the cold, controlled mask of the Oyabun. It was a rictus of pure, unrestrained terror. The look of a man watching his worst nightmare happen all over again. The drive back to the penthouse was silent, the air thick with the aftermath of violence and adrenaline. When they were finally alone inside, the silence stretched until it was screaming. Imani was shaking, the feel of the man's hand a phantom burn on her arm. Kaido stood by the window, his back to her, staring down at the city lights. "This was a mistake," he said, his voice raw. "Bringing you here." She found her anger then, a hot, bright thing that burned away the fear. "You think I don't know that? You bought me, remember? I am the walking, talking embodiment of your mistake." He turned to face her, and the control was back, but his eyes were haunted. "I thought I could keep you safe." "You thought you could keep Akari safe," she corrected him, the name a weapon on her tongue. "I'm not her. I am not your ghost." His jaw tightened. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with everything they couldn't say. The fear, the failure, the terrifying, unwanted connection that was growing between them in the crucible of danger. A few days later, his men brought someone to the penthouse. One of the Ito clan soldiers, captured after the gallery incident. Imani could hear the interrogation from her room, the low murmur of voices, punctuated by dull, heavy sounds that made her stomach clench. It went on for hours. The man wasn't talking. She couldn't stand it. She had been spending her time not just reading poetry, but studying Kaido's world, reading files as men left unattended, learning the names and histories of his rivals. She knew who the soldier was. She knew his weakness. She walked to the room where they were holding him. Kaido's lieutenants looked up in shock as she entered. Kaido himself was there, watching, his face carved from stone. The captured soldier was tied to a chair, bruised but defiant. "Leave us," Imani said to the guards. They looked to Kaido. After a long, searching moment, he gave a single sharp nod. When they were alone, Imani walked over to the man. She didn't threaten him. She spoke quietly. "Your sister works as a nurse at St. Luke's International Hospital. She takes the evening shift. It's a long walk to the subway station from there." The man's defiant glare faltered. Fear bloomed in his eyes. "I'm sure she's a very good nurse," Imani continued, her voice gentle, almost conversational. "It would be a shame if something were to happen to her. A mugging, an accident. Things happen in a city this big." She had crossed a line, a bright, clear line she could never uncross. She was using the enemy's tactics, threatening an innocent woman to break a man. The archivist who loved old books was gone. In her place was a woman who knew how to survive in the dark. The soldier broke. He told them everything. The location of the Ito clan's safe house, their next planned move, the name of their leader. When it was over, Kaido dismissed the man and his guards. He and Imani were left alone in the stark, quiet room. He looked at her, and his expression was one she had never seen before. It was not anger or approval. It was a kind of awe, a profound, unsettling recognition. Later that night, he found her on the balcony, the wind whipping strands of hair across her face. The city glittered below, a beautiful, indifferent feast. "Akari was afraid of this world," he said, his voice low beside her. "She was pure. It destroyed her." "I'm not pure," Imani said, not looking at him. "And I'm terrified. I'm just better at hiding it." "In this world," he replied, "hiding it is all that matters." He finally turned to face her, his silhouette dark against the city's glow. "Having you here, it is a greater risk than I anticipated." It was the closest he'd ever come to a confession. He wasn't talking about the Ito clan. He was talking about the risk she posed to his heart, to the cold, empty space he had built around himself after Akari's death. "For me or for you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers in the dim light. "For both of us." The information from the soldier was a roadmap to the heart of the Ito clan. Their leader, a man named Ito Kenji, was old school, a traditionalist who valued honor above all else. When his safe house was compromised and his plans exposed, he did the unexpected. He requested a meeting with Kaido. A formal sit-down to negotiate a truce. "It's a trap," Kaido's top lieutenant, a grizzled man named Morita, stated flatly. They stood in the study, the city a cold backdrop to their council of war. "Of course it is," Kaido agreed, his voice calm. "He has lost face. He needs to end this with a single, decisive act. He will try to kill me himself." "Then you cannot go," Morita insisted. "I must," Kaido countered. "To refuse is to show weakness. It would invite every other clan in Tokyo to test our strength." Imani, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. All eyes turned to her. "He's not targeting you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Not primarily. He's targeting me." Kaido's face hardened. "You will be nowhere near the meeting." "That's exactly why his plan will work," she argued, walking toward the desk. She felt their surprise, a woman daring to enter their domain, to speak on strategy. "He knows you'll expect an attack on you. He's counting on it. He knows about Akari. He believes history will repeat itself. He will create a distraction to draw your attention, and then his real target will be me. It's about honor. To take your second wife would be to utterly destroy you." A tense silence filled the room. Kaido stared at her, his eyes narrowed, calculating. She had seen inside his enemy's mind, had understood the cruel logic of shame and revenge that governed their world. "I have a better plan," she said. "Let him have his trap, and we'll walk right into it. But it will be our trap, not his." She laid it out for them, a countermove based on the internal rivalries within the Ito clan, information the soldier had given up. A way to turn Ito's own men against him at the critical moment. But it required one thing. "I have to be there. I'm the bait." "No," Kaito said instantly. The word was absolute. "Yes," Imani insisted, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You brought me into this world to protect me. But you can't protect a ghost. I am not a weakness, Kaito. Let me be your weapon." The meeting was set for a neutral location, a closed, traditional tea house in Kyoto. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and brewing tea, a civilized veneer over a brutal reality. Imani sat beside Kaito, her hands folded in the lap of her simple, dark dress. She was the picture of serene obedience, but beneath the fabric, her heart hammered against her ribs. Across the low table, Ito Kenji, a man with eyes like chips of obsidian, watched her. The negotiations began, a slow, ritualistic dance of words. Then, as Imani had predicted, the distraction came. A commotion from outside, shouts, the sound of breaking glass. Kaito's men and Ito's men tensed, hands moving to hidden weapons. Ito Kenji smiled, a predator's baring of teeth. He believed Kaito's attention was divided. "A man cannot protect what is most precious to him when his house is on fire," Ito said, his gaze flicking to Imani. It was his signal. Two of his personal guards, who had remained kneeling by the door, rose to their feet, drawing short blades. They moved toward Imani. But that was her signal. Imani let out a sharp, theatrical gasp and knocked over the small ceramic tea set on the table. The clatter was the prearranged sound. Outside, Kaito's men didn't engage the distraction. Instead, they broadcast a recording over a hidden speaker, a recording of Ito Kenji making a deal to betray his own second-in-command, the very man leading the distraction team outside. Chaos erupted. The attack outside turned inward, as Ito's men, hearing the betrayal, turned on each other. Inside, Ito Kenji's face contorted with rage as he realized he'd been played. His two guards hesitated for a split second, confused by the sounds of fighting from their own ranks. That second was all Imani needed. She was not a damsel. She grabbed the hot, heavy iron teapot from the table and flung its contents into the face of the closest guard. He screamed, stumbling back, and she used the moment to bring the heavy pot down hard on the wrist of the second man. His blade clattered to the floor. The opening was there. Kaito moved like lightning, a blur of dark motion. He dealt with the guards, and then with Ito Kenji himself. It was swift, brutal, and final. They left the tea house as sirens wailed in the distance. The victory was not clean. Morita, Kaito's lieutenant, had taken a blade to the side protecting their exit. The cost was always paid in blood. Back in the silent penthouse, the city lights seemed muted. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind an aching exhaustion. Kaito stood before her. He reached out and gently brushed his thumb over a faint bruise that was forming on her cheekbone where she'd been jostled in the fight. His touch was impossibly soft. "I brought you into my world to be my wife," he said, his voice a low gravelly sound that vibrated through her. "I did not expect you to become its queen." It was not a declaration of love. It was something more, an acknowledgement, a coronation. He saw her not as property, not as a ghost to be protected, but as an equal, his partner in this kingdom of shadows. He turned and walked to a panel on the wall, which slid open to reveal a safe. He keyed in a code and removed a slim leather portfolio. He placed it on the polished black table between them. "The Ito clan is broken," he said. "The threat is ended. The debt your father owed is paid in full. My honor is satisfied." He opened the portfolio. Inside was a passport with her picture, but a different name. Keys to a quiet apartment in a city she'd never heard of. And account numbers for a bank that held more money than she could spend in a lifetime. "You are free, Imani," He gave her the one thing he had stolen from her. A choice. He turned to leave the room, to give her the dignity of making it alone. He was offering her an escape, a return to the light. A life without fear, without violence, without him. She watched him walk to the door, the proud, rigid set of his shoulders, the loneliness that clung to him like a second skin. She thought of the smell of old books and the quiet life she had lost. Then she thought of the thrum of his heart against her cheek in the garden, the terror in his eyes when he thought he'd lost her, the weight of his hand in hers. That life was gone. This one was terrifying and violent, but it was also vibrant. It was real. And in it, she was not a victim. She was a queen. He stopped, his hand on the door, but he didn't open it. He was waiting. Imani picked up the keys from the table. Their metal was cold against her skin. She held them for a moment, then set them back down, her fingers resting on the smooth leather of the portfolio. "And what if I don't want to be free?" she asked, her voice quiet but certain in the vast, silent room. Kaido turned around slowly. The shadows in the room played across his face, but she could see his eyes clearly. For the first time, there was no guard, no wall, no mask. She saw not the Oyabun of the Tanakagumi, the cold master of Tokyo's underworld. She saw Kaido. And in the depths of his dark, haunted eyes, she saw not a cage, but a kingdom. And he was offering her the throne.